Good morning, good morning, good morning. Wow. Wow, I wish our economy were as vivacious as that song. I apologize. Beautiful San Diego, beautiful music, beautiful setting, mediocre economy. And I apologize in advance, but there's nothing I can do about it. But there are a couple really key things I want you to focus in on here and think about. We're not going to have a recession just because we're 8.5 years into a recovery. There's this notion that, we're long in the tooth, the business cycle tells us we're going to have a recession. Sure, we're going to have one, no question, but there's no reason it has to be this coming year or next month. So sit back, relax, and enjoy yourself right now. Growth could be better, I understand that, but we're okay, we really are. The economy has not been better than it is right now since the end of the recession in the middle of 2009. Global growth is good and so on. US growth here last quarter, 3%, quarter before 3.1. These are pretty good numbers, a little above trend, but good numbers. So don't sit here and worry that we're mechanically going to go into a recession. We're not. Let's begin by looking at the economy, how it's doing, how I feel about it, why I feel what I feel about it. So look, GDP, as we all know, comes from 4 terms, right? Household consumption, C, about 68% of GDP, by far the most important part of GDP, and we'll talk about how important it's been and how important it's going to be. It's going to be strong, and we're good, and we're happy on that score. Excellent. This year, I is going to be improving. It's been improving throughout this year. It's already buoyed GDP up this year, and it will do a helpful job next year as well. So C is solid, I is a little better, corporate investment in plant and equipment. Next comes G, government spending. That depends almost entirely on what the Trump administration does in Congress. I have some deep misgivings, which we'll get into in some detail about what they're going to do, but we'll get there in a few minutes. And lastly, there's exports. Yeah, who cares? Doesn't really matter. They're not big enough to make a difference in our economy from quarter to quarter. They do what they do, yeah, who cares? We'll brush on it briefly, but not. The focus of the game here is C, I, and a little bit of G. So let's see how good C is. Look, the stock market's fantastic, right? Every hour we set a new record. Everybody's happy in the stock market, right? You own stock, you own bonds, you own a building, you own a house, you own some real estate, you own a REIT. Everything's doing well, maybe too well, but that's a separate issue. Maybe the stock market's overvalued slightly. Yeah, okay, you could convince me. Nothing dramatically, but the stock market's good. Oh, our net wealth is really good. We're way up there. We were here at 55 trillion bucks. Now we're at 95 trillion bucks. That's a lot of money. That makes us feel good. So we spend money because of it. Not as much as we would have in the past. In the past, that much of a rise would have elicited a huge increase in consumption. But there are 3 reasons it hasn't. 1, we were traumatized by the recession. 2, we're demographically older as a country. The boomers are getting older and older and dragging up average age, and they're more conservative. As you get older, you think, I better save my money, because as long as I have my money, I won't die. And the third thing is the rich are getting richer and the poor aren't doing quite so well. That's the Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump frustrations to some extent. And that's reducing growth a bit. But all in all, this is pretty good news. So you can see what's happened now with total debt. Household debt is rising. You can see here, it troughed out somewhere in 2013 or 14, and since then it's been going up. And importantly for us, there's no housing boom out. There's no housing bubble going on. You can see that by comparing the yellow color, which is mortgage debt. And you can see that back here, it was rising like crazy. Now it's barely rising. So there's no mortgage debt problem here. We're not borrowing too much, can't afford the houses. FICO scores are high. We'll talk about that later. But the big difference now is look how important student loans have become. They've gone from trivial to terribly important. And you're borrowing this money early in your life, which means it's going to be a little harder to buy a house. You're going to buy a house. If you finish college, you'll get a nice job and you'll buy a house, but you're going to have a couple $100 a month payment on average, $200-300 a month. Now, we're all too old to remember, But when you're 22 years old, a couple $100 there, and then a couple $100 more for an auto loan in green, that's $400 or $500. That puts the kibosh on a lot of things you want to do. I mean, you're still going to go out and buy Coke, and you're still going to buy a bag of weed. Well, so the house is going to have to take it, you know? Something's got to be delayed. Maybe you're not going to get a tattoo or something, I don't know. But something's got to give here, right? So we're incurring more debt earlier in our lives. And that's going to delay us from getting the big debt, the mortgage debt later on. So this is going to have some implications for us. So keep this in mind. We're happy. We're borrowing more money. We have more wealth. Stock market's higher. Consumer sentiment is really good. I mean, these are numbers that we haven't seen in a decade, and sometimes 2 decades. This is households. So households are happy. Unemployment is 4.2%. It just doesn't get a lot better than that. That's terrific news. This is small business. Small business is also really happy. Look at this. Trump wins, and small business says, I can breathe, I can smell a tax cut. Okay, maybe now we'll get to it. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. There's some complications. But on top of that, whether it happens or not, unemployment is 4.2. This is a tonic that solves almost all problems economically. Lots of jobs, people are happy. This is very important. These unemployment rates are remarkably low. So businesses are happy, households are happy, but not everybody is as happy as everybody else. If you notice, Republicans in light blue, they are really, really happy. They don't need to take any opioids and drugs. They're happy. By contrast, swing voters are happy, but they've been happier, and it's the poor Democrats that are just plain miserable. Take up a charity fund and give them some Valium or oxycodone or, you know, something to put them out of their political misery. I mean, I'm joking here, obviously, but there's some serious sentiment. Political strife and fighting is as bad as it's ever been. But nonetheless, the economy is doing pretty well. It's continued to do and continue to slowly improve. This is really as good as it's been in 8 or 9 or 10 years here. Look at this. This tells you how happy. These are my favorite measures of discretionary spending. And nothing says discretionary spending like going to Vegas and blowing money, right? My job is good. I'm safe. My wife's job is good. I can afford my house. I have some savings. I can blow money. And it isn't really blowing your money. I hate when people say, I'm going to Vegas to gamble. You're going to Vegas to invest in very short-term financial assets. It sounds much more professional that way, right? But we're at all-time records, be it convention attendance. What is convention attendance at Vegas? This is kind of like having a 9-year-old go to Disneyland to do homework, but whatever. It's at an all-time high. Personal attendance by households is at or near 2016 may have been a high. We're not sure. We're estimating this. But these are really high numbers. How about other measures of general consumer spending? C, that critical first variable. Oh, how about buying a $500,000 horsey? Shockingly, it's recovered completely. So the rich are doing well. They're buying $500,000. I'm not kidding. These are auctions for $500,000 horses in Kentucky. We're doing well. And if you laugh, there's also good news elsewhere. How about buying an airplane, for example? You may scoff, I know, but nonetheless, our economy, it matters. What the rich do matters. It trickles down to some extent. I'd like more middle-class spending, but this is good news too. And now, looking at more mundane things, maybe you don't buy a horse and an airplane on a regular basis. How about a car? They're fine. So we're going to hotels, we're going to Vegas, we're buying cars. These are all discretionary purchases of the highest order. I don't care about buying cornflakes or a pair of shoes. You have no choice in those things, right? But going to Vegas and buying a car is always discretionary. You can always get an alternator repaired or get a used alternator or get a battery or a tire or fix the front end or something. I'm not a car guy. But to plunk down $30,000 or $40,000, that's a pretty confident, optimistic thing to do. Now, you may say, but Elliot, look, it's going down of late. Yeah, the cycle's over here. We're not catching up for cars we didn't buy in the recession. Cars last longer than they ever have before. And moreover, cars, mortgage financing for cars now is 84 months in many cases, right? So you can't turn your car over every 3 years with an 84-month note. So better cars, longer lasting cars, more expensive cars, this is fine. And the last spike up is Harvey, when all the cars in Texas were flooded. So a month or two, it'll dampen down. But cars are doing well. So we're a happy bunch of people here, right? If you put it together, this is C, the growth in C year over year. And you can see it's now 2.5%. I'd like it to be a little higher, but it's not bad. It's averaged about 3% for the last 3 or 4 years. Let's do some quick math here. 3% growth on 67% of the economy. It's 68 or 69, but let's pretend it's 66.6. What's 2/3 of 3? Come on, you're mortgage guys, come on. Outstanding, yes, public schools are okay, good. 2, what's GDP growth been in this country since the end of the recession? Right. So C, household consumption has been driving the boat for the last 8 years on and off. There have been exceptional periods. Other sectors have picked up, I or G or exports or something. But primarily, this is the story. And it will continue to be the story, and it will stay strong, and I'll show you why it's going to stay strong. But let's talk about I now. I is improving. It is improving. It was going down for years. It went down. 15 and 16 it declined, and early 17 it starts to turn around for a bunch of reasons. 1, unemployment is much lower than it used to be. Global growth is much faster than it used to be. Oil prices are much higher than they used to be. They troughed out at $30 a barrel on the right-hand side, $30. And as oil collapsed, rig counts declined. Now oil's going up. It's at 50 now, roughly 52, whatever it is. Slowly, rig counts go up a little bit. They've plateaued. These rigs are expensive to operate. The oil they get has to go into a truck or a train or a pipeline. That's expensive to build or move. And then it has to go to a refinery, often a new refinery that costs $5 or $10 billion to build. So this is a big deal. This can add 1/4 of a 1/3 of a point of GDP all by itself on increased expenditures by oil firms moving, transporting, distilling, and refining oil products. So oil's better. The globe is growing faster. Unemployment is lower. Corporate profits are up, right? They came down badly for about a year and a half. It's over now. About 1/3 of companies have reported profits so far this quarter, and they're doing fine, thank you very much. 80% are beating expectations. So we're good here. Corporations are happier. That's important. Moreover, manufacturing sector is at a near all-time high. This is how happy the manufacturing sector is, right? You can see it was as happy as this a couple years ago, 4 or 5, 3 years ago, then again 8 or 9 years ago, and then like 1,000,000 years ago. So this is good. We're happy. They're buying stuff. They're building plant and equipment. They invest a lot in plant and equipment to make automobiles and airplanes and stuff, compared to, say, I don't know, Starbucks that buys a new like juicer or something. It matters. I'm not bashing Starbucks here. They provide a good service. But when it comes to R&D and expenses and investments in plant and equipment, it's manufacturing concerns. That said, look at this. Service sector is also doing really well. They're a happy bunch of guys, too. Service sector, 65% of GDP. Manufacturing's 10% of GDP. They're at or near all-time highs. That's why our economy is fundamentally really quite sound right now. If you're not having a good time and you're not doing well now, go see a psychiatrist and get drugs. There's nothing we can do for you. You're an idiot, obviously, and you're missing the best economic time we've had in 10 years, right? I wish I could take credit for it. Here, look at this. So look at total corporate investment in plant and equipment. This is a very narrow measure of this investment in plant and equipment. But you can see clearly it's going. This is data from 2 days ago. Look at that upward movement there. That is friggin' amazing. I mean, that gets me all completely hot and bothered. I get a sweat on my body. I can't sleep at night. I'm dreaming about this. This is really amazing. This improvement is noticeable, meaningful, and important. Hopefully it'll improve labor productivity, which is very important, and which we'll touch on briefly. That's I. Let's talk about G now. All right, G is government spending. This is the tax cut that Trump's talking about here. And this is somewhat complicated, so bear with me, but it's worth it. Trump wants to do tax reform. Tax reform is really very hard to do. The last time we had tax reform was 1986. Before that was Kennedy in the early 60s, so you don't do this often. In 1986, when it was done, it was bipartisan, so Democrats and Republicans worked together. It was revenue neutral. Both parties agreed on that. Democrats wanted a tax increase, Republicans wanted a cut. They agreed on neutrality, and it worked. And they had 4 or 5 reps and senators who worked on this issue for years. Tip O'Neill and Reagan worked on it and were both committed to it. And Ronald Reagan had a popularity rating of 60%. Popular president, unified government, real desire to get it done, and it barely happened. That's quite different than today. Let's fast forward. I'm not even going to say how, that you can think that one yourself. Let's now fast forward to 2002 or 3 when Bush gives us a tax cut. That was done partisanly, as Trump is proposing now, through reconciliation and 51 votes to avoid a filibuster in the Senate. So Bush did it. What's the difference than today? Bush was a little more popular than Trump. He was not wildly popular. The big difference was the Congressional Budget Office, the Office of Management and Budget, everybody expected there would be a $6 trillion surplus over the next 10 years, between 2002 and 2012. Oops, didn't happen. It reminds me of that line in the movie from The Breakfast Club, the world's an imperfect place, you know, screws fall out all the time. It could have worked, but we thought we had the money, $6 trillion. Well, if you have $6 trillion, giving a tax cut is a plausible thing to do. We can argue if it was the best thing to do, that's something else. But it's plausible and reasonable. But look at the situation now. You've got to be kidding me. This is our budget deficit as a percentage of GDP between now and 2027. It goes from okay to bad if we don't change anything now. This is before the tax cut, before anything, and it's being driven primarily by Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security too. So we have a budget deficit that's quite severe as opposed to a huge, I mean, this is $800 billion, $700 billion a year. So this is a $7 trillion 10-year deficit, all right? As opposed to a $6 trillion surplus 15 years ago. And Trump is at 38%. I think they can get a tax cut done. It will be hard, but they'll probably be able to do something small because he doesn't have the horses in the Senate. He doesn't have the popularity in the country. It's a much harder road to hoe. If he gets the tax cut done, watch out. Because the key thing he wants to do on the personal income side, tax side, is double the size of the standard deduction. Right now, the standard deduction for an individual is roughly it's $6,300, but let's call it $6,000. So for a married couple, it's $12,000. He wants to double it to $24,000. There are 4 basic deductions people take. Otherwise, they take the standard deduction, which is $6,000 for a person, $12,000 for a married couple, which will now double to $12,000 for an individual, $24,000 for a married couple. The 4 basic standard deductions are mortgage interest on a house, right? You all know about that one. State and local taxes, or SALT. The third is charitable contributions and health care expenses beyond 5 or 10% of AGI. I don't remember exactly what it is. Those are the 4. So if those 4 numbers add up to more than $12,000 today and you're married, you itemize, and your tax payment falls. If Trump does nothing more but double the standard deduction to $24,000 for a married couple, those 4 numbers have to hit $24,000 before it makes sense to itemize. That's a lot more money in deductions you need to get. Now, in California, all houses cost $2 million, so it doesn't really matter. But in other places, even in Washington, it doesn't matter. Seattle or DC, it doesn't matter. Many places in the country, houses aren't that expensive. Right now, if you buy a house that costs, say, $250,000, $300,000, it's sort of touch and go if you itemize. Because you have to get at least $12,000 in mortgage interest and then property taxes and income taxes to get you there, right? Over the hump of 12. But over a hump of 24 is much harder. If it's successful, buying houses that cost even $500,000 or $600,000 won't have a mortgage interest deduction of value because you won't get to the $24,000 threshold. The National Association of Realtors is fighting this increase in deduction like crazy. It's a very hard argument to make because you have to say, well, no, keep taxes high for people, let them buy a house. Trump says, no, let's just give them all the tax money. Who cares about the house? It's an easier argument to make. But that being said, the other thing Trump is thinking of doing to raise money to cut the tax rates down on the individual side and the corporate side is to eliminate one or two of these deductible things. He's not going to touch mortgage interest, he said that. He's not going to touch charitable contributions, he said that. I'd be surprised if he touched health care, but you never know. But the one he's zeroing in on is state and local taxes. Which means if you have income tax at the state level of, say, $6,000 bucks, $4,000 or $5,000, right? And you have property tax of another $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 bucks, that's $10,000 that's now deductible to get you to your 12. But if Trump has his way, that won't get you to the 24. You'll only be allowed to deduct mortgage interest, charitable contributions, and health care. You'll have fewer things to deduct to get you to a threshold that's twice as high. As a result, owning a house will become a little less more appealing. And house prices will probably fall. They won't fall a lot, somewhere between 5 and 10%. And house prices are rising at 6% a year. So you could say 1 or 2 years of house price appreciation kind of hits the wind, it goes out the door. Okay, we'll live. But this is something to keep in mind as we go forward and realtors come to you and ask you what's going to happen. We don't know. I don't think he'll get this on state and local taxes, but he's trying, and they're going to make a compromise. Maybe they'll shelter people below $100,000 a year, or $150,000 a year, but that won't help much because those guys aren't itemizing in the first place. So it's quite complicated. I will keep you informed in my blog as this goes forward. But it's weird, this is complicated. I don't think he'll get a huge tax cut. It'll be hard. Tax reform is almost impossible. So I don't see government G, the third term in GDP, really doing much for us. And if it does happen, it won't happen until sometime next year either. This plan of getting it done by December 31st, I think, is just wildly optimistic. There's too many other things going on, and there's not enough Senate time to get it done. This is the dollar in terms of exports. The dollar, as you can see, has generally been kind of flat lately. Nothing really going on. That's why manufacturers are happy. Remember the slide I showed you way back when we were still young? This one here, manufacturers are happy because the dollar here, the dollar was very strong. It was getting stronger and very strong. They were miserable. Now it's flat to weakening, and they're ecstatically happy. So manufacturers are happy, exports are up a little bit, but again, nothing really important. Put it together, this is GDP. Third quarter GDP came out today. This is the slide from this morning. And you can see there's nothing really exciting going on. We've been stuck in this range here of about 2% since the end of the recession. 2%, right? A little higher, a little lower. And let me remind you people, it's not going to get a lot better because GDP is composed of two things. What makes up GDP is more people working. You know, if you make, I don't know, chairs, right? Oh, you make water bottles. Well, if more people make more water bottles, our society makes more water bottles, and that jacks up GDP. The other way you get more GDP is if the people who make water bottles make more water bottles per hour. That's labor productivity. If you add those two things up, more people working, and the people who are working better, that's GDP. That's those bars. The bar on the right is where we are right now, 2%. We don't have a lot of population growth because intercourse is just not as much fun as it used to be. Millennials, they don't work, they don't drive, they don't drink, they don't smoke, and they don't have sex. Don't trust me, look at the data. I mean, there's something different about these kids. I used to think, oh, I'm better as a parent, my kid doesn't smoke up. None of her friends smoke. They just are on their damn phones all the time. Okay, but whatever it is, we know we're not going to get a lot of influx in population from foreign countries for political issues. So tax policy should be focused on getting that number up. How do we get firms to invest, households to save so firms can invest, and people should go to school and get more education? Get a profession, finish high school and become a plumber, become an electrician, become a welder, become a radiology tech. Something, go to college, go to grad school, you gotta get something beyond high school. We need to encourage this behavior in our population to boost that 1.2. But right now, those are weak. They're not likely to change in the near future. 2%, 2.2, 2.3. If Trump gets a good tax thing done, maybe 2.4. But nothing really remarkable here. It's very unlikely. And last but not least, no recession. This is contemporaneous data as of October 6th. And you have to get to really -1 here before you can even really begin to think about the possibility of a recession. Forget it. There's no recession in the next 12 months unless we have a war with Iraq or Iran or China. You know, things go wrong politically. It could happen, but we're okay. Let's look at labor markets now. What's going on there? They are strong. They are very strong. This is job creation year over year. 2 million jobs. This is the data after Harvey and Irma. So we had 2 bad hurricanes that really whacked our economy. In the short run, the effects are already over and done with. But nonetheless, 2 million jobs. Now, we had 3 million jobs 3 or 4 years ago, and 3 million jobs is a hell of a lot better than 2 million jobs. How come we have fewer jobs? Can someone say the low rate of unemployment? You know, we had 7% unemployment back there. You could hire, I want an economist with a PhD. He has to have an MD and a law degree, and I'll pay them $11 an hour. And there were 100 people lining up for the job. Now, forget it. No one's coming because unemployment's low. So that's why we don't create as many jobs as we used to. Given that we're 8.5 years into a recovery, almost the 9th year, right? This is very good job growth. We only need 100,000 jobs a month, 1.2 million a year is all we need to keep the unemployment from going up. Any more than 100,000 a month, and we're getting 160, 170,000 a month, unemployment keeps falling. How low is unemployment? Look at the red line. This is crazy low. We're at 4.2%. The last time we were that low was not here at the housing boom, but the dot-com boom. And before that, it was the late 1960s. That's a great labor market. You can't look at this data and say we have a problem. We can argue quality of jobs, we can argue wages, we can argue labor force participation rates, we can argue a lot of other things. But we can't possibly say this isn't a strong labor market. Look at the other graph here. It's blue, it's on the left-hand axis. This one here, the blue one. It shows that the first-time claims for unemployment, these are people who get laid off or get fired. Involuntary separation is the fancy word they use. It's been so technical. It's like short-term financial assets. Yeah, right. It's below 300,000 now for 136 or 137 weeks. This is the longest stretch here since the late 1960s. Okay, is our economy as good as it was in the 60s? We could argue. Is it as good as it was in the housing boom and the dot-com boom? But we're talking here, here, or here. The 3 best periods in the last 50 years of our labor market to get it. I mean, if you aren't happy with your employer, and of course you are, that's great. But if you aren't, just give them the finger. I always tell you that. If you find that your boss happens to have a very attractive husband or wife or daughter or son, make a pass. Just You've never had a better opportunity to sabotage your career with very limited blowback as you have today, okay? So relax, enjoy yourself. Here's one more graph, just to give you an inkling of how strong our labor market is. This shows the gap between the overall unemployment rate and the unemployment rate for African Americans. The number is roughly 3%. It's too high. That we can fully agree on. But as an economist, what I'm looking at in this time series is, when was the last time it was lower? And this series goes back to about 1970, and you can see now it was low here. That's the housing boom. That's the dot-com boom. And the series runs out. This is as low as it's been in 47 years. That's, by relative comparison purposes, a very good outcome. I'd like it lower. There are lots of things that can be done and so on and so forth. But you look at all these measures of labor force data, it's really good. How about wage growth? We got a bit of a problem here. Despite these very low levels of unemployment, we don't have rapidly rising wages. Look here. So growth is going at 2.8, 2.7, 2.9%. Not bad, but not spectacular. 10 years ago, in the housing boom, it was about 1% higher than it is now. 20 years ago, dot-com boom, it was 2 percentage points higher. So not 2.5 or 3, but 3 and then 4 and 5 in prior decades and so on. So it's lower. Inflation's a little lower too. So real wages aren't so bad, but they aren't spectacular by any stretch of the imagination. And here's possibly why. There are a bunch of reasons that possibly explain it. Economists are a little bit uncertain as to why. But look at this. This is labor productivity. Remember that bar graph I showed with the blue and the red? And the weak red? That's the weak red. That's evidence of labor productivity growth being virtually zero. You can't pay someone more money if they don't make more stuff. You hire people in large measure because of what they can do for you in terms of making things or selling things or services or goods or whatever. This is somewhat anemic. It's a bit of a problem. So wages aren't going up all that much in part because of this. They're going up, but not as much as we'd like. And because they're not going up as much as we'd like, inflation isn't all that big. Weaker inflation than you'd think. Here, we're almost 9 years into a recovery, the end of the 9th year, middle of the eighth year. And where's the inflation? Where is it going? Where has it been? It's like a real head scratcher for the Fed. They're going like this. Where is inflation? Look at the data. This is the CPI, what you consider to be inflation. Headline is in blue, so it was going up there for a while, and then it comes down. That's 2%. Nothing remarkable here. But economists prefer looking at the red, which is core, no food and no energy. Because food prices bounce around because of drought or something in Australia, or oil prices bounce because of some stress with Iran and the Straits of Hormuz or whatever. These aren't really systemic US economic issues. So look at the core number in red. Notice that the core number was flat for a while, and then it went down, 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 down. That's really weird. So the Fed says, let's not look at the CPI. It's not a good measure. Let's instead look at the PCE. It's a different measure of inflation. I'm going to show you a graph of it now. It's almost identical, but lower. Everything is lower. So here's headline inflation in blue. It went up and then it's down, whereas in the CPI, it went up, down, up a little bit of late. Here in the CPI, core inflation flat declining, and sure enough, in the PCE, it's also flat and declining. It's a bit of a conundrum. In the past, 4 years ago, it was easy to explain. The dollar was strengthening and oil prices were collapsing. That kept inflation at bay. But now, why is inflation so low this late in the business cycle? Is there something changing? Yes, cell phone prices have collapsed. Yes, used car prices are way down. Yes, as a result, new car prices are way down. Healthcare insurance is really weak. Healthcare inflation's low. Educational inflation, like 4-year college, 2-year colleges, they're way down too. Is this just a quirk? Is there something serious here? And the Fed doesn't know the answer. That's the important thing. They don't know. And they tell us, we think it's temporal. Sure, in the olden days, when we had inflation below 2% during here and here, except for that 1 hour in 2012, the red line's been below 2% forever. But as I said earlier, most of this time, oil prices were very weak or the dollar was very strong, keeping inflation very low. But now we should be getting better inflation, and it's actually going down. Hopefully it turns around. But what's the Fed going to do? Inflation's low, wages are low, but unemployment is low. So the Fed's caught in a conundrum. This is what I think the Fed will do. I think. There was a big caveat. First, let's look at the height of the chairman of the Federal Reserve and interest rates. Notice Paul Volcker, very, very tall guy. He was 6'8", or as he said, 5'20". And interest rates were very high back then. Then Greenspan comes, who's shorter, and rates come down. Then Bernanke comes, a little shorter, rates keep going. Then Yellen comes, and they get even lower. So look, I'm rooting for Yellen here for a whole bunch of reasons. But it's obvious. I mean, you want Yellen, right? You put in anybody else, rates are going up because they're just taller. Okay. Maybe this is a bad analysis. I'm not sure. But who they put in here matters. If they put Yellen in or Powell, we have the same interest rate regime as we have today. The advantage Powell brings to Trump is he will deregulate markets, banks, more than Yellen would, all right? So Trump gets low interest rates, but also some deregulation. If he takes John Taylor or Warsh, I forgot Warsh's first name, the other two guys in contention, they will deregulate more than Powell, who deregulates more than Yellen, which is good for Trump, that's what he wants. But they'll also jack interest rates up faster. Not so good. So Trump has to decide what he wants. Lots of deregulation with Warsh or Taylor, a limited amount with Powell and low rates, or the status quo with Yellen. Powell will be a compromise markets would be happy with. If Taylor wins, markets are in for a mild, nasty surprise because short-term rates will go up faster. He wants them to go up faster. He said he's going to make them go up faster if he can do it. So pay attention to this. This will be a mild shock if Powell doesn't win or Yellen. If one of those two, nothing happens. But if Taylor wins, the markets will react negatively. They don't think it's going to happen. I don't either. But what do I know, right? So I've forewarned you. So here's what I think happens. Fed funds right now is 1.125, right? By the end of the year, they go up by 25 bips. Next year, they go up by 75 bips if we're lucky and it all works out. Then it goes up by another 50 bips, and that's it. This process began in the end of 2015, and by the end of 2019, 4 years later, we've raised the Fed funds rate by a grand total of 260 bips. This is a remarkably slow rate of rise in Fed funds. And the 10-year treasuries on the side, as you can see, are dependent upon tax reform. If tax reform doesn't happen, things will drop. But if tax reform hits, we get 2.5 and 2.9, maybe even 3, whatever. But nothing's going up super quickly. That's the important thing here, right? That's the most important. If Taylor comes, maybe they go up a little quicker. We'll see. That's what I suspect will happen. The market will have a hit. Interest rates will rise. The dollar will strengthen because Taylor's coming on board. But again, I don't know. If I knew, I wouldn't have to work for a living, right? I don't know. And last but not least, the Fed's going to cut its balance sheet. And by cutting the balance sheet, the Fed's going to be selling treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. The Fed's a very big player in the mortgage-backed securities business, the MBS, Fannie and Freddie debt. And because of that, as it sells it off, I think the impact here, the gap between the 10-year treasury and the 30-year mortgage will bump up a little bit. Not a lot, 10 basis points, 12 basis points over this closing down, the shrinking of the balance sheet. But there'll be some mild adverse effects on MBS a little because the Fed's such a huge player in the MBS market. They own so much MBS. It's incredible. Treasury market's bigger, it's broader, it's wider. Their impact is strong and big, but not as big as it is on MBS because the market's smaller and the Fed owns more MBS. So keep this in mind too. Rates go up a bit and MBS goes up a little more because the Fed's getting rid of their stuff and interest rates have to rise further. Last but not least, home equity lines of credit are getting popular now because people have 3% mortgages they got 2 years ago. They're not going to give them up. They'll rent their house. They're not going to move. They're going to keep their mortgage because it's super, super low. Now, let's talk about real estate. What's going on in the real estate market? Look, let me tell you, wherever you live, the problems you face are almost identical everywhere. There's simply not enough inventory, and that's the key problem. Realtors can't get listings. They can't come to you to get a loan closed because they don't have a buyer because they can't sell a house. So on one hand, things look good. Look at the red line. The red line is new homes, the dollar value of new homes built. Okay, $500 billion. It's not so bad. It's pretty close to what it was in 2003 or 4. That's good, right? No, it's not so good. Because the homes that are being built today are huge. Look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. Way back when, we built homes we built lots more homes. This is 8 years ago, the peak of the housing boom, 1.6 million single-fam homes. Now we're building 800,000, or roughly, last year, 2016. And look at the sizes. The gray and down are above 2,400 square feet. 50% of the homes built last year were over 2,400 square feet. Who needs a house that big? What we need are entry-level homes, right? But the builders aren't building any. You can see under 1,400 square feet. Yeah, like 3 houses. Are you friggin' kidding me? House price appreciation's off the roof. There's no inventory. We're creating millions of jobs. And the builders say, sorry, not interested in building affordable houses. Entry-level, market price affordable homes. Just regular 1,500, 1,600 square feet. Can't be bothered. So they don't build. And therefore, we don't build a lot of homes. This exacerbates the problem. And we end up with, here's why the builders don't build. Regulatory costs are exorbitantly high. In 6 or 7 years, the cost of building a house due to regulations has gone from $65,000 to $85,000. You can't build a profitable house that's too cheap with these kinds of burden on top of course, lumber prices have gone way up, right? Labor costs have gone up a couple %. And then you have this inventory problem. Look at this inventory. It's nuts. It's totally crazy. Look at this. This is the peak in inventory. This is Jan, Feb, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. The first half of the year, inventory rises and down, up and down, up and down. Fine, we got that. But look at the slope. It keeps going down, top, 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 or down, down, down the bottom. The peaks are lower, the troughs are lower. It's been 30 some odd months in a row of declining year-over-year inventories because the lazy damn builders don't build. Get them to build, romance them. Tell them you'll cut the 25 bips off the loan if the realtor comes that they have representing them. I don't know what. This is a real problem. And making it worse, foreigners are buying our houses too. So if you live in New York, Miami, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, maybe Santa Fe, I don't know. You have Canadians, Chinese, Indians. They're at all-time highs except for the UK. So the limited houses that we're building, foreigners are buying a couple 100,000 of them too, exacerbating the problem. In 2012, nobody cared because you had tons of houses and they were cheap. It's a different story today. We need the builders to build more affordable homes, more entry-level homes. Look at the house price appreciation, 6%. As I told you earlier, income growth is 3%. How can price appreciation be twice as high as income growth? This is unsustainable. And as we all know, if something is unsustainable, it stops, right? It stops. I know from my Coke days, whatever. Okay. But there's no housing bubble going on. There's no bubble. Look at the FICO scores now. And you can see way back when, 10 years ago, FICO scores collapsed. And that's why there was a housing boom. Option only, no doc, liar loans, you get the idea. Mozilla was the king of that. But then Dodd-Frank comes in, we restrict, and look at this, there's been no change. There's no friggin' change here. We have super high FICO because we've made it hard to get a loan. And despite that, we still have not enough homes for sale. This is homes, new homes. This is a safety valve. This is what's gonna make it better for us. If we build enough new homes, inventories will go up, price appreciation will come down, and things will get back to a healthy, normal state. But we're not building enough. Look. Multifam peaked out already, and it's coming down, right? Single fam is going up, grindingly slowly, and now at 800,000, 820, whatever. That's a recessionary low. You only get 800,000 going into or out of a recession. We're at a recessionary low level of home construction, single fam, almost 9 years out of a recession. We're underbuilt in terms of homes by somewhere between 4 and 5 million houses. That's why we don't have any inventory. That's why house prices keep going up. And there has to be some behavioral effect that results from this. So we're not going to have a problem. Housing price will continue to grow a little bit. We're continuing to create lots of jobs. Job market's good. We'll sell more homes. Home prices will keep going up a little bit. But we can't sell enough. There's not enough volume. But yet, credit's hard to get, as I mentioned before. There's no credit bubble. There's no credit bubble. And we have student loans, and those are depressing the demand for houses, right? So I'm confident and feel good that we're not on the verge of a bubble. No, it's simple lack of supply of housing. That's all there is to it. There's nothing more complex. Unless the builders build, we don't get a reprieve from this. How does this manifest itself? Well, first, refi is not really doing well. That's obvious, right? I mean, some people have a decent refi, but buy a gun, buy a bullet every day, just psh, you'll enjoy it. It feels good. Pulling the trigger will be, how relaxing that is. Maybe my worries are over. I'm living on refi. I mean, you're not living on refi. I know that, but you get my point. But look here. This is interesting. This is first-time mortgage apps. Look how they're declining of late. Now, they're still up 9% year over year, okay? Because we're comparing here to there. But soon we'll start comparing the current to here. And there's no increase. So we're going to get very soon to a point where year over year increases or changes in first-time mortgage apps are going to be zero because prices are too high. You'll have good volume. It won't be less than it is now. And prices will go up a little bit, so there'll be more dollar volume, but there won't be great volume in the sales numbers, right? Total units, loans closed, and so on. Look here. This is sales of homes, of homes. This graph goes back to 2000. You can see the peak was 7 million for a few months there in the housing boom. It crashes. It slowly improves. This gets us to the end of 2015. Let's bring it forward now. Look at that number. It's flatter than a friggin' pancake. So we have first-time mortgage apps looking a little weak here at the far right, right? Far right, looking a little weak. And we've got sales looking kind of flat. And we have pending sales also flatter than a pool table. Something's happening here. New sales are a little bit better, new, but not much. So there's something, a behavioral something is taking place. It's not tragic, don't get me wrong here. You're going to have good income this year. There'll be fine volume. It'll be roughly the same as it was this past year with a 6 or 7% bump up because of higher house prices, maybe a smidge more volume. Maybe a smidge less. You're fine, right? 18 looks good. But be careful, be efficient, be productive, reduce all waste you possibly can. This is important because you're not going to have organic, massive growth in unit sales because there's nothing to sell, right? And last but not least, focus on these millennials and focus on the boomers. I'm right there. No one cares about me. I'm in the end of the oldest of the X generation. This is the valley of procreative death. Intercourse just wasn't fun back here somewhere, 20 years later, 30 you're getting kids. But these guys are important. They have a lot of money. They're going to live a long time. They're going to keep moving and buying and redefining old age and redefine death. Similarly, the millennials are also going to redefine how we think of youth and what they do. And there's so many of them. Look at this. There are 20 million millennials right now, around age 26. In 3 or 4 years, they're going to want to buy a house. This problem of housing isn't going to go away unless the builders build a lot more houses, and I don't think they will. All right, quickly, where's here? I put arrows around all the areas you're active in, and you're in really good places. Right now, except for Oregon, every state that you're in is doing fine, thank you very much. And it's most important to look at the color of the map. The individual states aren't that important here. They flip around a lot from month to month. The overall color's good. The next slide shows leading economic indicators. And again, they're good. Okay, California's turned bad in this case, I'm aware. But again, don't worry much. I don't see a problem here in California. I really don't. But you're in good states: Iowa, Montana, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, Idaho, Washington. They're all fine, thank you very much. And last but not least, unemployment rates. They're low everywhere. But in many of the states that you're in, they are stupendously low. These are states that have minuscule rates of unemployment. These are states that have good rates. I mean, even here, the only 2 bad states are DC, Alaska, and New Mexico. That's it. Everybody else is fine, thank you very much. It doesn't really matter where you are, they're all fine. And last but not least, moving. Look at where people are moving to. They're moving to states that you're in. Not one state that you're in is yellow with the exception of Utah, and it doesn't really matter because so many births are more births than deaths. Their population skyrockets even if lots of them leave away to get booze or something, okay? So don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. You're fine. You've picked really good states. You're in the West. House prices are appreciating faster in the West than the East. So even if home sales are flat in the West, you're going to get even more of a bump up than you would even if sales are flat. You'll get 8 or 9% of a bump, because in the West Coast, in the West, house prices are going up faster than the eastern half of the U.S. I've covered too much territory. I've bombarded you with information. First, my name, my cell number, my email address, my website, my Twitter handle. If you don't get my 70 words on economics, sign up at my website. Give me your business card or text the word bow tie with no hyphen and no space to 22828. Let's review. The economy is as good as it's been. The chances of a recession in the next 12 months are remarkably low. They're as low as they've been since the end of the recession almost 9 years ago. The labor markets are solid. Unemployment is low. This recovery has legs, despite how old it is. The uncertainties we face here are the Federal Reserve, who will head it up. If it's Taylor or Warsh, rates go up faster, the market's a little perturbed, right? The other thing we're concerned about is the mortgage interest deduction, the doubling of the exemption, state and local taxes. I'll keep you informed on this, but we don't know what's going to be. No one knows. The Congress doesn't even know. It's impossible to handicap this. The other thing we're focusing on is inflation. If inflation doesn't pick up much, it becomes hard for the Fed, if it's Powell or Yellen, to raise rates much. So no inflation, not much GDP growth, not much interest rate rise. But if we get GDP up or inflation up, or if we get Warsh or Taylor, interest rates rise a little bit more. Wow. I'll hang outside for a few minutes. We can answer questions. There are other sessions you've got to go to. I've spoken too long. I apologize. It's a pleasure being here, as always. Call me, email me with questions. I love you all and appreciate you all immeasurably. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.